In the last two parts of this series, I focused on some of the largest land battle shots for my short film Heroes of Bronze. Based on the poll I did a while back, however, you also wanted me to break down the one naval battle shot from the middle of the film. And since, despite its many technical issues, it's one of my favorite ones, I was glad to jump into making this video. First though, a bit of announcement. Apart from working on a new course for CG Boost, which will be announced before the end of the year, I have recently updated my Master 3D Environments in Blender course there. More specifically, it's the chapter 4, which was always the most problematic, giving some students a little bit of a headache. Well, that's now a thing of the past. All workflows have been updated, improved, and made to work in the latest Blender versions. More info in this video on my channel. Apart from that, I've made a brand new tutorial for CG Boost YouTube, which is also connected to the Enviro course. In that one, I show how to make 3D trees into 2D billboards, which can help you save some performance and render huge numbers of particles in your scenes. I use this technique all the time, not just for trees, but for anything really. Stones, buildings, even characters. So check out the videos, and if you want to grab the environment course, a huge part of Heroes of Bronze funding actually goes from that. So please do. With that out of the way, let's talk about this shot. First off, I gotta say I've struggled a lot with it, especially when it comes to water simulations. I actually thought about simulating the whole ocean and the many dynamics and interactions in it. Alas, I wasn't able to learn the techniques in time before the end of the deadline I set for myself for Heroes production. And so, apart from a few particle simulations of water drops, I failed to make the water interact with the oars and the boat hulls. Fortunately, I think that the shot still works despite these shortcomings. There are quite a lot of elements to this shot, and as I've done in the previous videos, let's go through them one by one. As you're probably already used from my breakdowns, this shot works only from the point of view of the camera. That's usually the smartest way to work though for CG shots. In the end, I've created the stormy sea with a good old ocean modifier. I've chosen the generated geometry and the turbulent ocean type. Here you can see my settings. I've repeated the geometry quite a bit since it wasn't visible from the point of view of the camera. For the render settings, I've chosen resolution of 20, that gave me enough detail, and then in the wave settings, I just increased the choppiness to 2 to have a bit of a sharper geometry to the waves. I animated this time value, and though I usually employ the generator modifier here in Graph Editor to make the value rise linearly, from some reason I just simply keyframed it in this case. Anyways, the most important thing was to set up the speed of the waves so that they work together with the camera move and so that no waves go through the camera. About setting up my camera movement I talked about in the previous breakdown videos. Here it was all the same. For the oceans material, I've used the awesome shader from Polygonic, now part of the Aquatic package. If you've never tried that one, I wholeheartedly recommend it. And especially for large bodies of water, this water reel, with its many elements, like boat wake, shore foam and more, is truly amazing. Follow the link in the description to get it. At the front of the ships, I used this water stream footage that I got from none other than Ian Hubert. On his Patreon, he introduced this concept of faking water streams by actually warping footage of streaming water and foam. I used his elements on the front of the ships, parenting transparent planes with streaming water sequences to the rams of my triremes. Again, not the most elaborate effect, but it added at least some semblance of interaction there. Next part of this water was actually little droplets blowing towards the camera. There is nothing too complicated about this. I just made a few particle simulations of lots and lots of little spheres with some children to it, using some fields to blow them around the boats. I then rendered everything separately to be able to composite the droplets over my shot later. In my environment course, I show a step-by-step guide on how to make waves like these using just Blender and built-in tools with some lightning on top. So if you're interested in replicating this result, definitely check the course out. When it comes to the actual scene, everything is the way you know from my previous videos. There is in fact just one sky image, again placed very far in the background, with some nice colors complementing the sea surface. Two things about this sky. One, I made it animate slightly, the cheap 2D trick that I mentioned in my previous breakdowns, And also, I deactivated the shadows, so it doesn't accidentally obscure the lighting of my scene. Then, I chose this specific HDRI image from Polyhaven to give my shot a basic lighting. To blend everything together, I added a large block of volume fog, with bluish color and a very low density. I like how these fog effects make the various elements of your scene come together, so for that, I was willing to suffer through slightly longer render times, since volumes in cycles are still a bit taxing. To top it all off, I added two lights. One big area light shining from the top of my scene, with large power and roughly the bluish purple color of the sky. This one brightened up the water surface so that it matched the sky even better. I also added this super powerful spotlight to the right of my shot, so that there are a few glints here and there, acting as sunshine. This spotlight served especially to highlight the various triremes and their crew. Speaking of triremes, those are of course the most important element of the shot. And when it comes to the actual model, you may be surprised. It all started for me with this free model from Dmytro Kovkun at BlendSwap. I used it as a basis for my modeling, especially for the hull and the rowing stations. Though technically not right, since pentaconters were smaller vessels with fewer oars than triremes, I was able to make it work with some adjustments. The large part of remaking this model was also the custom textures I made for it in Substance Painter. Here you can see one of the model variations, where I used just the front of the ship for close-up shots. You can see the basis of the shot is obviously a wooden material, onto which I added some masked color fill layers, which I could change at will. Then I added an image of the eye, which is something most Greek ships featured. It was there mostly to ward off evil and scare enemies. I used a transparent image I painted for it, put it on this empty layer, and hand painted a mask to make it blend with the hull a bit better. Over it, I put one of my favorite bronze materials I constructed for heroes, and finally a layer of this moss that I put only on the bottom part of the ship, simulating some algae growth. Showing you how I made this model step by step is of course outside the scope of this short breakdown. Nevertheless, you can at least download this file from my Patreon along with the materials it contains. Those you can then reuse on your own projects. To make the trireme move, I first parented all its various parts to this driver empty, and that one I constrained with this follow path to the path curve. That animated the ship to sail along this curve, and I just checked the follow curve option and then played with the axes like this to find the right positioning. Finally, I controlled the position on the curve by manually keyframing this offset. One trick I like to do when animating ships on waves, and yeah, it's not really too visible in this case, but it works, is to use a constraint called shrink wrap. Basically, on the empty driving this ship, I applied this constraint and targeted the water surface below. That made the ship always orient towards the normal of the water surface and rotate it like it's floating on top of it. You can see that when I play with the offset, the ship is actually copying the elevation and angle of the waves from the ocean modifier. Of course, when I leave it to default value of 1, this is a bit too intense. So for my purposes, I usually set it to 0.2 or 0.1 influence so that the effect is a little dampened down and the trireme doesn't copy every single bump on the waves. One thing to watch out, if you're using the ocean modifier, you'll probably have a lower resolution set for the viewport than you have for the render. I actually had 7 set for viewport resolution of the waves, while 20 for the final render. And what happened when after many hours of preparations, I finally hit the overnight render? In the final result, the trireme suddenly went crazy on the waves. That's because there's a lot more geometry in the rendered version, and lots more little bumps and waves for this shrink wrap to take into account. The animation looks smooth when the resolution is low like this, but with higher ones, there is so much more detail to shrink wrap to. The solution was, I simply made an identical copy of my ocean, but there I just set the low resolution for render and the viewport. Then I hid it from rendering, but I used it in the shrink wrap slot instead of the original ocean geometry. One last thing when it comes to the triremes, the animations of the oars. I actually went a bit crazy again and animated every single oar individually. So I spent a lot of time probably too much time, on making every single one of them move and desynchronize them so it seems like they're individual oarsmen below the deck. On the deck of the triremes, there are a lot of marines and a crew. I have spent a lot of time showing how I made these characters in the previous breakdowns, so if you're interested, definitely head over there. From those previous videos, you also already know I'm a big fan of compositing my final shots in After Effects. And once again here, I've rendered this scene in several layers to be able to play with the final look later. So the layers I used for this one were the sky, over it the base layer with all the ocean and the triremes, and then heck of a lot of water mist, drips, foam and spray elements that I always rendered with the triremes in a holdout mode so that they poked a hole in the alpha. In the end, all of these were very soft and quite hard to notice, but they're there, and you can see each of these add a bit of a detail when it comes to moving and dynamic elements in the scene, either around the ships, flying towards the camera, or dripping from the oars. But yeah, as I mentioned at the start of the video, the effect may be a bit too soft, and the lack of interaction of the oars with the water is pretty apparent. So there, a little bit of a regret that I have. The remainder of the composition was pretty simple this time. I just added a few of my obligatory color layers that I blended in with large feathered masks. One to add more of a bluish haze in the background here. The other one to darken this background trireme so that it doesn't stand out as much, and to hide the fact that there are actually no rowers inside it. Finally, I added this large blurred yellow color here to simulate the glow of the sun. Over all this, I blended this subtle effect of lens dirt and water drops using this image. I like to add this to all my shots situated at sea or water. And the final effect is the chromatic aberration. Again, link to the free plugin is in the description. In the final composition, I overlaid a red giant mojo effect for coloring, with these simple settings and a bit of glow with very large radius to slightly simulate the diffused lighting conditions of such humid environment. The final effect as usual was the grain, using the built-in After Effects system with these settings here. I was originally much more ambitious in what I wanted to achieve with it. But yeah, time constraints were severe in the end, and I had to settle for something less detailed, but still hopefully somewhat epic and good looking. If you have any more questions regarding this one, do not hesitate to ask them. But with that, I hope this was useful, and until next time, stay creative my friends. Martin out.